Welcome to the April meeting of the Tulsa Archaeological Society. And so tonight, Istara Freedom is going to talk tonight. She's an artist, a sculptor. She is a writer. She's an historical researcher and also preservationist of indigenous land. So she has quite a background. She come from Seattle to talk to us tonight. So without further ado, we'll just let her start, introduce herself. Thank you.
Hello, Taos. It's really good to be here. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. And this will be the second time for my presentation this evening. The last one went well. We'll see. Tonight's a little different, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you all. So thanks again for coming. So I'm Istara Freedom. I live in the Seattle area right now, outside of Seattle, and I'm an artist. I am a writer, a researcher. I think he said all that. I do a lot of different types of art. Most people know me for stone sculpture. I also teach stone sculpture at a institution in Seattle, beginning stone sculpture, and I particularly love working with teenagers. But my roots are in the Southwest, in the Four Corners. I was born in Arizona, and now I know I'm a Genizaro. So let's find this page. I am a Genizaro, and what is a Genizaro? This was taken from an article written by NPR in 2016. I'm gonna edit a little bit of it. So I'm a Genizaro, a descendant of Native American slaves. Genizaros are living heirs to the Native American slaves. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Native American women and children captured in warfare were bought, converted to Catholicism, taught Spanish, and held in servitude by New Mexican families. Ultimately, these non-tribal Hispanicized Indians assimilated into New Mexican society. So this was an article done by NPR, and it was specifically kind of featuring residents of Abiquiu, which is where most of my family and roots center around. So I was born in Arizona, as I said, south of the Hopi Reservation and the Pueblos. I moved around a bit in the Four Corners, and I spent the first 12 years of my life in various places in the Southwest, but primarily Bears Ears and Moab, Utah. So this is a picture of me about age 11, doing one of the things I love to do, which was reading mostly. So I like to fish also, but I could sit there and read books for a long time without having anybody bother me. And my experience as a child in Bears Ears and Moab was really idyllic, because there's the 70s. It was before these areas were destination spots for many tourists and recreationalists, and there was a lot of freedom. And I give so much thanks and gratitude to my father, who, though he doesn't come from the Genizaro culture or, descend from this part of the world, he had an immense respect for it and for nature and the desert. And he did land surveying, and he knew all of these amazing places and so much about all the layers of nature, from geology to astronomy, basically. So, but he would take us out, and I'm the youngest of 6 kids, so he would take us out on these treks to these amazing places that all I could say is that, not having known anything about him, it was just really this experience. We would go to sites that he found where there would be a cliff dwelling super high up, and a yucca or hemp ladder, maybe like 200 feet descending straight down the wall. And I was a child, and sometimes I knew that these places were going to be on a certain trip here or there, and I love to sleep in the car, but I said, wake me up when we get to the ladder, wake me. I needed to see it every single time because it was astounding. So there were various things about my culture, which I didn't know, my ancestry, which I didn't really realize at the time, as well as just aspects of nature, creatures and how everything kind of relates to each other and gets along. The animals, the small things, the creatures. So I had a really blessed experience with what I would later come to know as my roots from my mom's side, with her ancestry, with her pueblo, and the Spanish colonists coming in and how it intertwined. And though there weren't words for it, or there wasn't a description or an introduction from my family, it was happening for me. So at some point as an adult, completely unrelated to all of these things, I had some relatives that were visiting Abiquiu, the move to Abiquiu, and I visited. And it was a brief visit, but I went to the Abiquiu Inn and had dinner, and they have a nice little gift shop and bookstore, and I picked up a couple of books on the history, local history of the area, and just thumbed through them and very quickly noticed my family surnames from my mom's side. So that was fascinating to my brain. I wanted to know what was going on, why, because they're not common names. Ulivari and, well, Romero, not so much where I was living at the time. So this was a significant discovery for me. Then at some point in my research, I learned that my Romero family was living in the Barranca area of Abiquiu in the mid 1700s. They're on the census list there. So my family and their habitation and their relationship with Abiquiu goes back, around 200 years with the Spanish, and then, millennia potentially with the Pueblo, which we have actually confirmed through DNA studies, which I'll speak about a little bit more as we go along. This photo I took actually just a few days ago when I was visiting Abiquiu, and it was from one of my favorite places in Abiquiu, which is just above the plaza where the area of Abiquiu that's called the Moki starts, which is the Moki is where the Hopi-Tewa people lived and settled, or at least were kind of assigned to after the colonists had taken over the village and then brought the indigenous people back to their own homeland. So from up here, you can see the plaza, the Santo Tomas Catholic Parish. That's actually the back of the little library, which I'm going to talk to you guys about in a little bit also. Oh, thank you. Abiquiu. This is a photo of the front of the Abiquiu library. So I don't know how many of you have been to Abiquiu or know about Abiquiu. After my discovery of Abiquiu and kind of doing some research on the family names and my family's relationship to Abiquiu, at some point I learned about the library. It's not very, well known. There's not like a sign that says library this way, but the library, it's very special. This is right across from the Santo Tomas Catholic Parish, and it's a small building. The librarian there now, Sharon Garcia, has been tremendously helpful to me and very many other people in all aspects of research, cultural history, conversation, the whole thing. So Sharon, as the librarian, shared with me at one point that this was her grandparents' house when she was little. So she played in the library as a child with her grandparents, and then at some point her parents donated their home to the Catholic church, and now the library rents this building from the Catholic church. But it has been an incredible resource and is just very valuable to me in this process. And I encourage you all, if you visit, to stop in there. It's not just a library, it's a cultural center, and there's a wealth of information to be had there. So this work is dedicated to my mom. On the left, Estela Urivari is her maiden name, and that's a photo of her when she was young, and this picture of me with her a couple years ago. She lives now in Grand Junction, Colorado, and that's kind of where my family migrated north after having been really rooted in this area, Rio Arriba County and Taos County primarily. I might want to add that this process of research has really developed a whole new chapter of my relationship with my mother, because simply a couple generations removed, she had really lost contact with all of the information and knowledge about our ancestry here. And she's a wealth of information of certain things, but so much was lost in a couple of generations. And even for me, my mom speaks Spanish and my granny spoke Spanish primarily. And yeah, I don't speak Spanish. I wasn't taught how to speak Spanish. And I don't recall really, to my knowledge, any native words or language, references in our language. It was Spanish that my granny spoke. So after I discovered Abiquiu and started delving into some research about both Abiquiu and my family's relationship and being in Abiquiu, I planned a trip in 2018 independently of this study, the Abiquiu DNA project, but my trip had kind of overlapped. This was happening a day before, and I was able to change my flight, and it opened up this huge chapter of getting a deeper level of involvement. And they were presenting the results of this DNA and genealogy project at the time of my visit. So I was able to attend that celebration and listen to the talks, the results of the DNA project, and then quickly thereafter was able to get my mom's DNA analysis submitted to the Abiquiu DNA project. So the DNA project, they took samples of 10 males and 10 females from Abiquiu and then analyzed the DNA and the genealogy to gain a better understanding of the relationships between the families in Abiquiu and the ancestry, and potentially the relationships with various tribes, because Abiquiu is known as a Genizaro village. Well, not only a Genizaro village, but a very specific hub of a Genizaro definition, because it was a trading center, and part of the trades that happened there were actually human people could be purchased there. Indians who had been ransomed, captured, were available to be bought and sold there. So it's actually challenging to say that, but that's what was going on. That was a part of the trade that was happening in Abiquiu. So primarily in Abiquiu, there was a Hopi Tewa community, and at some point when the first Spaniards came in, and those are also some of my ancestors, they forcibly removed the community that was there, and a number of the Hopi that were living there moved to be with their Hopi community in Arizona, on the reservations and on the mesa there. And then after a time of the Spanish being in Abiquiu, it became really clear that they were not able to sustain or develop the kind of colony that they wanted because of all the raids that were happening with the other tribes. So primarily Ute, Comanche, Navajo, and there were other things going on that I really can't say that I know, but those were the main ones. So they reached out to the Hopi that they had displaced off of the land of Abiquiu that were at the mesa, and they actually traveled to Arizona and brought back 24 of the Hopi families that had been removed from Abiquiu, and brought them back and said, well, you can have your land back if you're willing to protect us from the raiding tribal communities. So there was a lot going on. As a result of being able to submit my mom's DNA to the Abiquiu project, we were confirmed to one of the founding families there, and we had a relative. Her name was Concepcion Lobato, and she was born in the late 1700s. I have some notes here, 1793, and she was a member of Abiquiu. However, they didn't know, they were kind of stuck at where she was. So a couple of our families go back to her, and as a result of many of my research trips in the Abiquiu library, looking through many records, I found her finally, and she was born here in Taos. So, and her family was in Taos for a while. There was some movement between the Santa Cruz de la Canada part of what is now Española, as well as the Okeowinge, which was at that point the San Juan, known as the San Juan Pueblo. My family roots in Abiquiu. In 2021, during COVID, the pandemic was very disruptive to many of our lives, including mine. And I was living in Seattle at the time and had the opportunity as an artist, many of the events, the live events, my teaching, it all shut down. So I took the opportunity to actually move to Abiquiu and have an immersive experience. So in 2021, when I was living there, so many things happened that could be, many talks, but I received some gifts from my family. My big sister brought me some photos. I'd never seen these, but they were in my family. This is my great granny Sotela Martinez and my great grandfather Juan Pablo Romero. And these were photos that were taken in the mid 1800s in the Abiquiu area. I believe they were living in El Rito, possibly at Las Casita at the time. And I was staying in a beautiful little adobe casita in Abiquiu, and bringing these photos into that space was sort of like having my family there with me. They're almost life size, and they're photography, but as an artist, I looked closely at them. They're partially a photographic process and partially drawn on with some kind of a charcoal or light pencil, and that was also an interesting bit of research. So then I wanted to see if I could, do a little comparison of myself. I never got to meet my great grandparents, so I had the black shirt and found some napkins to fold up, and this is the result of that. So my granny Adela was part of my life. She passed when I was about 11 years old. This is a little bit of her in the photo to your right. And my great granny Sotela and my great grandfather Juan Pablo Romero. And they were living in Abiquiu, La Casita, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which is now an archaeological site, kind of centered between Abiquiu and El Rito. And this is a photo of my granny Adela. I'm not sure how old she is at this point, and it's probably was taken in Canjilon, where they migrated to. So my granny Adela and I, like I said, she passed when I was 11. My mom is the youngest of her line, and I'm the youngest of 6 children. So there was an interesting relationship dynamic with my granny and I, because as her primary language was Spanish, sometimes I felt she was upset with me, and she would say something, and I most likely will get the accent wrong, but she would be like, "Oh, why don't you speak Spanish?" And I thought she was, mad at me, but I came to understand later that she really wanted to share things with me that she was unable to because of that language barrier. So there are many things that I actually do recall of a cultural exchange that my granny foods she made, very local New Mexican things, pastelitos, bizcochitos, hot chocolate, pozole. There are things that are actually that I grew up with that I didn't realize at the time were part of our culture here. This was another one of the photos that my big sister brought and gifted to me, and as you can see, probably Juan Pablo Romero, my great grandfather on my mother's side, and on the left is Jose Leon Ulivari, who is also my great grandfather. And having never even met my grandfather, Rosendo Ulivari, this was a very interesting photo to me because clearly my great grandfathers were friends and, significant members of their community to have this photo taken together at that point in time. And Jose Leon Ulivari is my great grandfather, as I mentioned. My grandfather, Rosendo Ulivari, was his firstborn child. His mom, my great granny on that side, Felicitas Abeta, died in childbirth. And something happened at that point where my great-grandfather went to live with other relatives. My great-grandfather, Jose Leon Ulivari, married a midwife. I can only imagine that it was the midwife that was delivering my grandfather at the time, because there was only one midwife in the area, as I've learned from historical records. And they went on to have a family of about 13 children. And one of his other grandchildren with his second marriage I'm in touch with today, which is really special. Rio Chama. So the Chama was really significant to me when I first went to Abiquiu and visited the area. I just felt this kind of emotion when I saw the Chama, and I felt this emotion. This river is very special to me and my family, and in fact, where my Romero family lived in the 1750s was along the Chama River in Barranca. And then through their migration, it seems that they continued to follow it north, because after sort of their time in Casitas, then they were in Tierra Amarilla and Chama, and I still have relatives that I'm learning about and meeting in these areas, and they migrated up into southern Colorado. Nonetheless, I'm very fond of the Rio Chama, and I still feel like it represents a significant lifeblood of who we are, our community, the greater extended community for the whole area that it passes through. And that is a lovely photo of the Rio Chama that I took on a visit. So with this, and my research done, there were several petitions for land and several land grants that I found my family were part of in the area, in the greater extended area of both Rio Arriba and Taos County. One of them was a petition for land in 1874 by my great-grandfather, Juan Pablo Romero, and a few others along the Rio Chama specifically, but I don't know the outcome to this petition. I'm assuming it wasn't granted. They moved on and migrated, but they did stay close to the Rio. So La Casita came to me, and in my research, I have to refer back to my mom's DNA results and profile, and the various parts of this journey that it created connections and intersections with. And I was able to connect with one of our relatives who actually is in the audience tonight, Annette Valdez. She's the granddaughter, her grandmother and my grandmother were sisters. So she had all these handwritten papers that someone had written with our family, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, their children, who their children married, so much information, relatives that I had never even heard about. And one of the things that was written in these papers, and that was way before I met her, was that our great-grandparents, Sotela and Juan Pablo Romero, were residing at a place called Las Casitas, as it was written in those papers. So in El Rito. So being in Abiquiu, I started to investigate the possibility of finding out where La Casitas might have been. And I had this a little bit of an idyllic picture because they were my great-grandparents. And when I think about an archaeological site, I think about really ancient people, not about like somebody that's just a couple generations removed. So this was quite the discovery. And I imagined there was a little, old building with some cute numbers and, had this picture in my mind, but it turns out La Casita is this archaeological site, which is located between Abiquiu and El Rito. And I did visit it once, and I reached out to the archaeologist, Paul Reed, who is sitting here tonight and who invited me to speak after this journey of research. And we went out there. That was shown there, the remains of the chapel. And other than that, there wasn't a whole lot of information I gleaned from that visit. I did feel this sort of sparse feeling of desolation, and wondered what the original discoverers and archaeologists had found. And I know that there were artifacts that were recovered. I did actually get some papers that Paul had sent me that there were some studies done in the 70s by some anthropologists that did quite an extensive research on people that were living there. And while it is referred to as La Casita and Las Casitas, there was a fairly thriving population at one point for the time in the hundreds, maybe up to 600 at the time. But there were several settlements throughout the El Rito area, although La Casita is the only one that's known to still have a chapel remaining. So it was a Spanish, and I will take the liberty to say that it was a Genizaro community that had been associated both with Abiquiu and the surrounding areas, due to the fact that the main families were amongst the five, kind of founding family, Spanish colonists who had come in, as well as what seems to be a large representation of the population of Tewa. There were also found some sherds and evidence that there were some Apache mixed in, and I imagine there were some other tribes as well, because this community also was influenced and dealing with various raids and influences from other tribes and other members of different land grants where some of the boundaries were kind of unclear. So there was a lot going on there as well. There's evidence of a little bit of agriculture, but primarily it seems like they were ranching at the time with sheep and cattle. And in fact, my grandfather Rosendo, who I mentioned before, was a sheep herder and ended up in Pueblo, Colorado. Unfortunately, in addition to my not having met him, he met a violent death in what I know in 1964, in kind of a Wild West shootout, where it was kind of like, let's take 10 steps back and like see who goes first. So that was my grandfather Rosendo. La Casita, this is a bit of a wider angle view for you all to see of kind of what the chapel looks like and the surrounding area. At one point there was the El Rito Creek that flowed through the area, and in addition to the raids and skirmishes that were going on, there was a very significant drought in the late 1800s. So I feel like that is why people abandoned this site primarily, although there's much more research to be done. Some of the research that's been done in my research indicates that it wasn't a year-round permanent settlement, that there was a part-time, or that they were moving somewhat between both Abiquiu, El Rito, and Canjilon, Chama, because they probably went north when it was warmer and then came back down to this area when it was a little cooler. This is a little, finally, at some point in the records, because I had this information that my relative had given me on these handwritten documents, but I hadn't actually, and I learned about La Casita, and I had actually visited it. And then when I was in the library doing research, because I've done many trips and many, I call them going down the wormhole kind of trips, in these researching of these ancestors, and I found my great-grandfather Manuel Lorenzo Romero, baptized in 1928, and was actually listed in this record as being a vecino of or resident of La Casita. So many of the family then in the record books are either attributed to Abiquiu or El Rito. However, the time period indicates that they were likely living at La Casita at the time. So this is my great-granny, Maria Sotela Martinez, and she married my great-grandfather Juan Pablo Romero, and she migrated to Canjilon, where they were living in Canjilon when my granny Adela was born. She was born in Canjilon, and I know, like I said, I never met her. I think my mom only has a couple memories of meeting her when she was a young child.
You're listening to Istara Freedom on my Genizaro Roots, recorded at Taos Archaeological Society on April 3rd, 2024 in Taos, New Mexico. This is KCI 90.1 FM, Red River, Taos.
This is I did make it up to Canjilon and tried to find the cemetery and try to find, I didn't realize that she was buried there at the time, but her mother-in-law Concepcion Lopez was, and I know that she stayed close to the family. So I tried to find that grave, and when I finally found the cemetery, this crazy storm broke out and I wasn't able to look at anything. I had my dog with me, and even she was trying to run as fast as she could back to the car. But I just got this photo again from my prima Annette, who gave me these records, and just visited Canjilon and found her grave, which is really significant and special to me. I feel close to her. Sotella, I looked it up. Sotella is another Spanish name for star, and my mother, Estella, and me, Istara, I feel like we have this special connection there. So, as I said, I did move to Abiquiu in 2018. Is a very powerful part of my learning and experience in really getting to feel what it was like for my ancestors, because the truth is, one of the really special things about Abiquiu is that it hasn't really changed too much over the past couple centuries. I mean, it could be 1940, it could be 1840, like there's no paved roads, there's no signs, there's no streetlights. There's something really amazing about that. And I felt like as I was living there and walking through there, that the DNA is strong and the energy is strong, and I could feel and hear like whispers of their voices in the cottonwood trees, and like songs in the rocks, and I could feel the times when the energy in the village was flourishing and good. I could feel times when there was fear and heartbreak and disruption. So it was a real gift. I did leave Abiquiu, but I do come back. I've come back ever since I discovered it as often as I can. Abiquiu Feast Day. So Abiquiu has two feast days actually, and that is because they had two different chapels. There's a Santa Rosa de Lima in the Barranca area, and my family was likely living there at the time that chapel was active. Although I moved in July, they hold the feast day for Santa Rosa de Lima in August, and I wasn't able to make that full ceremony. I was a little disoriented and woke up a little late and drove the wrong way and kind of caught the end of it. So come time for the Santo Tomas feast day, I was prepared. I was early. I really wanted to have this experience, this cultural experience, because they honor the native traditions and have kept them alive throughout the centuries, even without necessarily knowing where some of the ceremonial songs and dances have originated from. Dexter Trujillo, who is wearing the ceremonial headdress, is the keeper of the wisdom, and even he says that the songs he sings, he doesn't necessarily know the translations of the words that he's singing. So this was an incredible day. I was prepared. There's a little bit of a story I have in this slide where I was in touch through social media with some other people in the Genizaro community. Gary is a filmmaker and was working on a film which has now been released, the Genizaro Experience. It's a full-length documentary on Genizaros, and he had been preparing for about a year to be at this feast day to take footage for his film, and the weather was not good in Taos and he couldn't make it, so which is where he lives here in Taos, and he asked me to be the filmmaker. So I kind of stepped into like work shoes that day instead of observational shoes, and it gave me a little bit of a lens. But this is a bit of the ceremony. It starts in the plaza, and they do dances and songs and drumming throughout the plaza, and then the next part of the ceremony is held inside the parish, and they do a special mass for this St. Thomas feast, and then they come back out in the plaza, and there's another ceremonial procession, at which point everyone will pack up into their cars and drive to another part of Abiquiu, which is on the Moki, which is in the indigenous part of the village, and finish up the ceremonies there. So the feast day for Santo Tomas is while the keepers have kept the tradition of the songs and the dances and the drumming, the main thing they're holding on to is the Abiquiu village was a place where the Genizros, the servants, the slaves, those supposedly ransomed, captured, protected, were bought and sold, were often the young girls and the women, and they would dress them up and they would parade them on market day. And so this feast day in particular, the young girls of the village will paint their faces and put on these lovely ribbon dresses, and they want to always have it be remembered that this is where our mothers and our grandmothers have come from through this process of having been displaced, purchased, sold, and repositioned within these families of Spanish and European colonial descent. And as the beautiful little girl in the middle, keep an eye on her, because at the end of the celebration, when we all packed up and moved to the indigenous part of the village, I was completely surprised, taken off guard, and honored that they welcomed me as an honorary member of the Abiquiu de Pueblo de Abiquiu. And I got to, they paired me up with one of the young girls, and it happened to be the beautiful young girl in the last photo. And I got to dance and do ceremony and wrap up that day as an honorary member with two other people that they were welcoming that day. So that was both unexpected and incredibly heart expanding for me as a cultural experience. Abiquiu, it's just beautiful. The views are stunning. There's so much diversity. There's so much history that's stacked and layered. If you get the chance, and please do visit the library and the cultural center, because they're very welcoming with people who want to come in and just say hi. If you have any questions, if you want to do research, Abiquiu, the library, is a very special spot. I'm dedicated to the preservation of this culture and the people that have helped me with this process of learning and welcomed me into the community. One of the results also of having had my mom's DNA analyzed and submitted was 2 years ago, I was contacted by the sheriff's department in Northern California, which part of my family lives in now and where I had lived for a while. And they had, with recent DNA, with technology and DNA, had analyzed the DNA of a woman who was found at the bottom of a cliff in 1967 in Sonoma County, whose remains they had. And when they were, after my mom's DNA was submitted, they were able to get a very close match. They said possibly a first cousin. And so when I presented this to my mom, because she's 89 now, so I'm in charge of her DNA, I'm the contact person. They contacted me first, and I told my mom that I had received this call, and I asked, was there someone in our family that you remember? And she did actually remember that we had a female ancestor who was missing for a time, and that some of the family had actually hired a detective, but that eventually, now this was in the 60s, I was born in 1970, so before I was born, that they didn't really get very far with it, and it all kind of dissipated and was dropped. So as a result of the DNA testing, as of last year, they contacted me to confirm that it is indeed our ancestor and our relative. And she was a few years older than my mom, Lillian Cardenas. So they're now preparing a press release, which will come out, I'm not quite sure when, with the confirmation of her identity and putting it out there for other people who may have any kind of information or leads about what it might have been going on at the time, so that they can solve this cold case. And here is just another example of this kind of vast river of blood and tears with our missing and indigenous women. And beautiful Lily, this photo is included as an honor for her. So that's it. Do any of you have any questions? Thank you. Thank you.
So if anyone has any questions for Istara?
Hello, sir. What is your name? Hi, Phil.
So how has your sort of identity and self-picture changed as a result of your researchings and explorings?
Thank you. That's a beautiful question. I feel a deeper connection both to my ancestors, even having not known them. I feel that I have a lot of questions answered that were kind of just deep knowings in my DNA that didn't necessarily have any kind of a place. Like I've always had this sort of kind of ceremonial aspect to my life of collecting things from nature and putting things together, and not always things that are wanted necessarily in my house, like jars of dirt and feathers and sticks and strange things like that. I feel like, well, one thing is that with the Genizaro community, many people who realize that they are a Genizaro or have questions about their roots initially start this process with the wanting to discover what tribe. We know we have some indigenous in us, but we don't know or have the connection to the tribe. Growing up, my mom knew she was part Pueblo, but that was it, and it wasn't actually a search that she could invest the time in or had the interest for at this level at the time. So one of those people being very curious as to the possibility of discovering what tribe we originated from, have really been amazed that both through the genealogy, it really isn't that there is one tribe that we can call ourselves. So we have been confirmed as being having originated from Pueblo. However, in my genealogy studies about 200 years ago, there are quite a few of them, and they're all part of the northern Pueblos. So San Juan, as it was called at the time, okay, Iwinge now being the primary one, but also Picuris, Santa Clara, San Ildefonso, and possibly a couple others, but those are the main ones. And I'm still answering that question. Honestly, it's an ongoing process, but I feel confirmation that my roots and this knowledge has just confirmed to me the importance of the connection to the land, because I have a sensitivity to land, and I was fortunate to grow up in some of my ancestral places, but there's so much that really goes beyond words. And even though we've been cut off from our languages and we've been cut off from our culture, we still have this connection to nature. We have this connection to the land. Our DNA is in communication constantly. And I am really honored to say I'm a part of the larger community. And I've also come to understand that the tribes themselves have experienced their own traumas and are vulnerable in very many ways, and that there's no kind of, call to co-opt or try to be inclusive to a specific tribe. It's really the ceremonial relationship with the land and whatever offerings that I can receive just through the communication and the story. And everyone's story is important because there's so much that's been lost, and we're so interconnected that I feel like the more we create alliances and share stories and keep with some of the traditions that are universal to the tribes. For instance, in Abiquiu, one of the things that I discovered was really truly alive is this gift aspect of gifting. Like there's gifting amongst the people. Like the gifting can come in the form of a story. It can come in the welcoming from the library. It can come from the sharing of an artifact or a book. And it's often spontaneous and beautiful and significant. And that the culture is really rich and alive with all of that story, energy, principle, and yet the conquering and the warfares and the isolation has created a lot of conditions of poverty for the tribes, and even the ones that are federally recognized still have a lot of things to deal with on those levels, being disconnected from the land, being disconnected from the greater landscape of which the tribes were all connected, so I feel like it is truly a process that I look forward to being able to answer better in some years, Thank you.
Do you have any idea of like how many not the same Genizaros there are in New Mexico? Like
It's a significant amount of the population. I can't say that I particularly know, but I would estimate maybe up to 3/4 of what, Paul, do you have an idea.
That seems like what I remember from reading, some of, Genizaro scholar named Moises Gonzalez. He teaches in architecture at UNM. I think he was saying at least a third and maybe as many as half of, the peoples of New Mexico, the the Hispanic, Spanish derived and other peoples have Genizaro connections and roots.
We're spread out. There's quite a few of us in the Pacific Northwest where I live, southern Colorado, where a lot of people migrated, and spread out in various places. So it is a significant community. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I was wondering if, while you've been doing your research, have you met other people like your age doing the same kind of research in different places, or can you say?
I have actually, and I've connected, and I'm quite grateful to social media as much as I dislike it. I have to love it because it's put me in touch with groups and people that are doing this research and have been very helpful. And when we are able to share and compare notes and informations and stories and the results of our work, because there are people that both my age and older that have been doing this work for quite a while and have produced work like Moises Gonzalez, Gary Medina Cook, who just finished the film The Genizaro Experience, which actually is screening in Santa Fe April 27th. And if any of you are interested, I can get that specific information for you, but it's also available on PBS now, so you can look it up. And I watched it, and there was a little bit of my footage that was included, but I learned so much, and it was truly a moving experience, and I want to watch it and rewatch it. So there.
When you were talking about trying to find your family in La Casitas,
Yeah.
were you able to find the artifacts that were excavated?
No, and I have not, and that's a bit of a mystery. Some of the papers that were written have a few notes about where some of these artifacts might have been. What I get is that they weren't very well cataloged. They kind of got shuffled around. Some of the descendants of the original excavators have some of them evidently, and I'm not sure what and where, and that would be nice. And that was a feeling I had a little bit of like, wait, this is my family's place that was raided. But I also have some gratitude for them and the work that they did, because I wouldn't have necessarily known about it without that. And at some point maybe I'll be able to find and
So Paul, will some
research
of this
that.
be in a museum though?
A lot of it, well, in theory, it should be at the lab of Anthro. But the researcher, person's name, Sunseri, I think they had a California connection, but they're still likely to be curated at the lab of Anthro Museum in Mexico. But I shared material with Istara, but I didn't read extensively on all that. So I think there might be some more clues potentially. So that's something she and I have talked about, continuing to work on for sure. And we were talking with Phil before the talk about as well, trying to see how much of this community is still out there. Because going out to the site, the chapel's very obvious. It looks like there's a few other structural remains, but it's pretty dispersed. And I was just wondering, thinking about it, people probably packed up things and moved. But if they were used to moving quasi frequently, they might have been very mobile in all of their materials. So that may explain why there isn't a huge concentration of artifacts there and structural remains.
Very recently, in some of my genealogy groups, I saw the only other and first mention from a person that also has a reference to her family being at La Casita. So I feel like it could be opening up, and there could be more research and more work and more understanding about what was going on at the time. Because it's also a trading center, as I know, mostly ranching and trading. So yeah.
How did the process of slavery end? No.
That is a really good question, and I'm not entirely sure that I have an answer for that. There were some different legislations passed, and whether that was kind of a hard end to it or not isn't probably likely. So I could imagine that it might be somewhat unknown as to when that actually ended, yeah.
So I can jump in, they had to pass a separate law to be sure, at least on paper and in the legislation, that enslaved peoples in New Mexico are free. So it was a separate law that passed after the Civil War, I think it was 1867 or 1868, specifically written for this state to be sure people are free. But I think like Istara said, you know, in practice, who knows? For that actually,
The Spanish outlawed,
what's that?
the Spanish outlawed it at one point.
On paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is research that Moises and Bill Pyatt, right, have really spent a great deal of time. The book is,
Slavery in the Southwest, and by two scholars, Bill Pyatt and Moises Gonzalez, and that was reading that book and being able to interact with them and their vast amount of research that they have done was really profound part of my understanding and knowledge. So I'm very grateful to them. I could say that going through all the records at Abiquiu and looking at so many of them, that it was fairly frequent that there is a record of an indigenous person being purchased, a child, maybe even 2 years old, and often by the Catholic Church. And they would sometimes indicate what tribe they had come from if they had, and there were a lot of Ute and Navajo that were, those were the main ones that I saw, and there were children from 2 to 6 years old that were recorded. And then after that, in a lot of the records, I would see that there was a younger person, like often it would be a male servant who was listed as a servant, but would be like a teenager or something like that that was incorporated into the household, listed on a census, for instance, but designated as a servant, but not necessarily with where they had come from or what their tribal affiliation had been.
I'm curious, and I'm not really sure how to word this properly, but in your research, as you spoke with your mother and perhaps other people from the older generation, did you find that they had a curiosity about this, or was it close enough to their own world that they really, it wasn't talked about? Or
I would say both of that is true. That there was a great divide, for instance, with my mom, and just within 2 generations, they lost so much, and a lot of it was survival. That a lot of it was, I feel like, effects of the trauma and discrimination and wanting to, avoid and opening up painful wounds or not having answers to things that, could bring up painful situations or just that they didn't know about. And yeah, my mom is very curious, and it has brought us closer together, and she's learning a lot along with me. And as we go along, some things will be triggered, I'll discover something and then she'll remember something, and she's very fascinated. So yeah. And many of the elders are, and it's interesting. I feel like I started this process, sadly, like right after a significant amount of the elders had passed in, say, for instance, in the Abiquiu community, like 2016 even was a big year where many of the elders that I would have really, really loved to have had the opportunity to speak with. Napoleon Garcia is one of them, who is known in the community and has written a book and has some books written about him. And some others that are gone, and their children told me, boy, you would have loved to talk to my grandpa, because you could have found out so much. And so that's sad, and but there's still so much to be discovered, and there's still so many conversations to be had, and there's bits and pieces of the story that come together from talking to different family members, even who live in different parts of the community that aren't necessarily close but have bits and pieces. I see it rather like a tapestry, and or maybe the, reweaving or the repairing of a tapestry. And I will probably never understand how that tapestry was put together, and could never pull out the individual strands of that tapestry that went into it. However, getting all these pieces, I'm able to see a pattern, and it's quite beautiful. Yeah.
yes, La Casita actually is a site watch site. Are you familiar with the site watch organization?
Site watch organization.
It is New Mexico Site Watch. They have a lot of stewards that look after the site to make sure, you know, things are not vandalized and all that. So I have been there myself several years ago.
To La Casita?
La Casita, and Mark Henderson actually, took us there together with, Zapawe. We did it together. So there may be more information if you contact New Mexico Site Watch.
Okay, thank
And
you.
it is actually a site that stewards, go and, make sure that things are not vandalized and make reports periodically.
Great, well, thank you. I've never met someone that has visited La Casita, so that's pretty cool. Yeah. Yes.
So when you're in Seattle now,
Yes.
when you tell your stories, is there any resonance among indigenous folks from that area to your story? Are there any parallels, or does it seem very different to them?
There are parallels. There are parallels within the generational loss of information, contact, and land and community. I think that the differences are more related to how the land and how the tribes related to the land, because up there, so the primary tribes were the Duwamish, were part of the Salish group of the Salish tribes, and from what I understand, and I have worked with some of the members of the Salish tribe and on some land restoration or rehabilitation projects, but that the Salish tribes have an ancestral connection actually to our tribes here in the Southwest through our mitochondrial DNA. And so there is that connection, and I do feel close to many of those tribes. So there's an effort to get land back there. Sometimes parts of Seattle that I've lived in, there are advocates that'll have, signs on their property that say we are on Duwamish land. And so there's a movement of activism to raise awareness that we're on ancestral tribal land. So, yeah.
They don't regard the Russians as colonizers in any way.
I'm not sure I could speak to that at this point. Yeah, there were colonizers. There were a lot of Norwegians, and there's a little bit of a different story up there. Yeah. Before we wrap up, I want you all to know that prior to coming out here, have written and published what I'm calling a bookita. It's a small book. It's a story. It's a story about this journey. It fleshes out some more parts, and it's available on Kindle. Same title as my talk, My Genizaro Roots, Istara Freedom. So if you're interested, please check it out. And thank you so much for coming.